Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Last week I did an extreme budget challenge using bulk food prices and my grocery haul came in at $14.62, which is about $2 per day. This week I'm creating more delicious recipes from that grocery haul. And I'll have a list of these ingredients along with prices in the description area of my video. Let's go ahead and recap on what I made last week. To start out with, I made a delicious carrot cake bread. And for this, I used 2 of the eggs, some flour, and 2 of the carrots. This was truly delicious and such a treat for me this week. And then I made my own mayo using the broth from the chickpeas that I cooked. And I also made some pickled onions and some pickled cucumbers. And for those dishes, I was preparing for a meal that I'm making today. I also did some prep on my meals, like I cooked all of the chickpeas, got those ready and put those into the freezer. I also cooked a large pot of the basmati rice and I also put that in the freezer. And I kept out just enough of the chickpeas to make 2 servings of this delicious and refreshing chickpea salad, which I tried out my new mayo with and it was absolutely delicious. And now that I've caught you up, let's get into this week's meals. I've been so excited to try this Filipino version of garlic fried rice. And it's just super basic and it really fits into the kind of recipes that I like to make. It calls for day-old rice. I've had this in the freezer for about a week now. It calls for garlic cloves and then just some green onions. This is a very garlicky dish, so if you don't like garlic, this is not a dish that you want to make. I'm only making 1 serving for myself and I'm using 2 cloves of garlic. And you can slice this in rounds if you want to. I think in most presentations I've seen it chopped like this. And some parts of this green onion are kind of old, but I'm going to go ahead and keep this and put this into the pile for the broth that I'm going to be making later in the week. I'm getting quite a collection here, so I know it's going to make a delicious broth, and it means we're going to have 0 waste, which I like. And I also think that I haven't really seen too much of the white onion in the mixture, but I'm going to put that in there. And I'll leave a few of these pieces off to garnish. I'm cutting this at a diagonal. These small details have a big impact, and I should have some smaller pieces on this. Okay, so there is some questions that I have on the garlic. I have watched so many videos of people making this, and a lot of times it looks like the garlic is burnt, and I think to myself, there's no way that can be good, because as you know, garlic becomes bitter when it's cooked too long. Here are my ingredients. I have salt, pepper, just regular oil. I've got the rice. I've got the green onions, the garlic, and 1 egg. I thought this would be a great dish to top with a fried egg and have for my breakfast today. Again, this is just using whatever oil that you have. And then we're going to add the chopped garlic. So as I was saying, I've watched so many videos because I was thinking to myself, they cannot be putting that dark of garlic on there because it would be bitter. And I did find some recipes where it looked like it was lighter color. So I thought I would play around with this. Most of the garlic will be in the dish and then we'll take out a small amount to top it with. So I thought what I would do is I would be very, very careful with this garlic that's going to go into it. And then I'll let the garlic that I'm going to top it with get a little bit darker because I do want to try it. And I have seen, again, so many videos with the dark brown garlic on the top. So I do want to try just in case I'm wrong. And it does go from light to dark very quick. This is already starting to turn color, so I'm going to pull it out now and take out the majority of this and I'll leave the rest in, and that'll be for topping. So I'll let that get a little bit darker And yeah, I'm gonna actually just pull that out now. And here's the last one that I pulled out. As you can see, it was fairly dark, and I've seen some that are a lot darker than that. Okay, here I'm adding in the lighter garlic that goes into the body of the rice. I've really loved using the basmati rice for cooking. It's nice because they don't stick together. And so also every time I wanted to make a meal, I would just dip out a bowl, which I knew would be a serving size for me. You could just freeze this in serving size bags, especially if you're someone like me who only cooks for one. It just makes making dinner so easy. Okay, you are going to salt this. I'm not adding any soy sauce to this. Obviously, if you wanted to use soy sauce, you could, but a lot of recipes that I found don't call for soy sauce and some do. So it's really up to you, but I do kind of like finding recipes that don't use soy sauce, especially for people that maybe don't have it. Just knowing that just regular salt and pepper is a great option. And this tastes fabulous. I added just a touch more salt. And of course some black pepper. There is something so intoxicating about this scent of garlic in this rice. I'm already drooling. And I have really been looking forward to this recipe, unusually so since it's such a basic recipe. But all of these things are combining together, like my love of this basmati rice. I'm just really enjoying cooking with this. Sometimes just mixing things up a bit, changing up your normal routine can be so exciting. And I'm just going to quickly fry up an egg. My only goal for this is I want it to be crispy on the outside of the egg, just to give that extra added texture to this dish. And actually, I think I was rushing this egg a little bit. Should have been a little bit crispier on the outside, but I am on sensory overload and I cannot wait to dig into this rice. This is definitely not the most colorful dish, so it's not appealing to look at, but I can already say that I'm a huge fan of this rice. That added garlic just really elevates this and makes it something special. The garlic that I added into the rice was cooked perfectly. However, this garlic that I put on top, as you can see, is a little bit dark, and as I suspected, it is a little too dark for my taste. It does become a little bit bitter. But I did want to try it as I had seen it made. But next time I will make the garlic that's put on top exactly like the one that I did in the middle, because that was cooked perfectly. And then I'm going to try this with some egg. And you know, I had been looking so forward to making this dish and it did not disappoint. This is a great dish to make with leftover rice. You could also add in some protein in here and any kind of vegetable that you want. I like this chili garlic sauce, and so I'm just kind of adding just a touch to it, and that really helped to balance this out. And it's surprising what the addition of the green onions do to this recipe. They just bring it all together and add a freshness that really helps to balance the richness of all of that garlic. But overall, this was a great dish, and I will definitely be making this again. I can see why this is such a thing in Filipino cooking. For my next meal, I'm making a one-pot chickpea and rice dish. Took out a bag of my frozen chickpeas and thawed those out. So I've got the rice and chickpeas, and I'm going to use a small amount of the bell pepper, some tomato, green onion, garlic, and then I also have this cilantro. I'll be using that in the dish and also to top afterwards. So I've got everything chopped up, and this tomato looks like a lot of tomato. I still have half of this left over, So I'll just save that for the next recipe. And I haven't used this in a while, so I'm not really sure how much rice to add into this, but I think I'm going to try a half of a cup. And again, I'm using my basmati rice here. And then in terms of seasonings, I know I at least want to use this celery salt, garlic powder, and turmeric. I think I'll add just a very small amount of bouillon also. And for my liquid, I'm going to be using some of the bean broth that I saved from cooking the chickpeas. This dish was actually inspired by one of my viewers, and she said that when she uses the aquafaba, it seems to make the dish creamier. Now, her dish, she actually used quinoa, and she made hers a little bit different. She likes to either serve it on a bed of spinach or add in some frozen spinach into this meal. So there are lots of different ways you can do this, but of course I'm just working with the ingredients that we've got, and I think that this makes a very, very nice mix. We're going to get some great flavor out of the green onion, the peppers, and the garlic. That is just going to be fabulous. So my viewer, I do remember she said that she uses some canned tomatoes in hers, so obviously you can do that as well, but here I'm just using a half of Aroma, which again is very inexpensive, and I wanted to show you how thick this broth is. It's so interesting because it had a thick top to it, almost like a bone marrow broth, or a chicken broth gets that thickness on the top, which is generally fat, but here obviously it's just chickpeas, so there's really no fat in there. I'm not even sure what that is, but it's very thick. And I did decide to add just a touch of water. I probably didn't need to, but it's my first time using this in cooking, so I'm just kind of playing it safe. And remember, I had a half cup rice, and I'm doing 1 cup of water, and I had to pick out a sticker that was still on my pepper. I've definitely had some mishaps in this video, but I've also had some big wins, so I'm okay with that. And in case you missed it, I'm warming up some of the seasoning bouillon with just a touch of water, just to help it dissolve a little bit better. And then I'm going to add my chickpeas. I was thinking in my mind that maybe a cup would be about the right amount, but I'm just going to add about a half a cup at a time to kind of see where we're at with the mix. Chickpeas are rich and they need to be balanced with all of the other ingredients. I'm adding in some garlic powder, even though I'm using some fresh garlic. I'm adding turmeric, and then also just a touch of celery salt. Not too much because I am also using the bouillon, but you could even just use the adobo seasoning that we made in a video from a couple weeks ago. I think that would be really good here. And if you use canned chickpeas in this recipe, you do need to be careful because those will already have sodium in there. And the liquid will have salt in it as well. So you're just going to have to kind of play around with this in terms of the seasoning and maybe add less salt or skip the celery salt altogether. And you'll also need to be very careful with your bouillon, whatever kind that you use. Those always do have a lot of sodium. And I added some more chickpeas in here and then I took a few out. I wanted it to be the right ratio and I think we've got it here. And then there's only one more thing left to do. I'm going to go ahead and taste it. That's really the only way to know if the seasoning is right. And this is already fabulous. It's cold, but it's fabulous. I am going to add just a touch of Spanish paprika for some smokiness. And then I'm going to let this cook. And I could smell this cooking from all the way in my bedroom. It just smelled so delicious. And I think this cooked about 25 minutes. And then I came back and it was ready. And I wanted to stir up all of the ingredients because the garlic was on the bottom, and just evenly distribute this. And just looking at this, I'm so glad that I didn't add more water. If you remember, I was wondering whether I should add a little bit more to make this creamier, but this actually looks and tastes very creamy. It has just the right amount of moisture content, in my opinion. And it looks like it has the right mixture of the vegetables to the rice. It's kind of late now for my dinner, but I cannot resist having a small bowl of this. And I did want to mention that when I originally cooked my chickpeas, I was trying to cook them to where they were a little bit on the firmer side because I knew I wanted to make this recipe and I didn't want my chickpeas to fall apart. And they ended up being a little softer than I wanted them to when they came out of the Instant Pot. However, that being said, they're very tender in this dish, and I actually really like them that way. I love everything about this dish. The aroma, the flavors. It has an intense flavor of the garlic and that seasoning in there. You get the richness of those green onions, and the red peppers really added a lot here. That $1.50 that I spent on that red pepper was so worth it because it's really elevating a lot of my meals. And then the tomatoes are giving some much needed acidity to this dish. I think next time I will cut my red peppers and tomatoes in larger chunks so that you get a nice sized piece in each bite. The more I use my mini dash, the more I love it. You can just take this little container out and then eat right out of that. And this just makes dinner and cleanup so easy. I think the key on this dish though is the toppings because everything is kind of soft in your mouth. And then you want to top it with the fresh cilantro. And then later I tried topping it with the green onions. And that was the sweet spot where you get that crispy, crunchy topping along with the soft texture of the interior. I rate this recipe a 10, and this is definitely going on my rotation. My viewer mentioned a chipotle seasoning base, and so I really can't wait to try this with some different flavor profiles. And I noticed that they had a sofrito, which is a Puerto Rican seasoning, and then an adobo base, which we've already made, and then a chipotle base. Obviously, you can just season those yourself with your own spices, but these are just some shortcuts. And of course, you can do like a chicken or a beef. You could add little chunks of chicken in there or beef, and it would cook right into the pot and be a wonderful one-pot meal. So many different options, and they even have some reduced sodium. So I'm definitely looking forward to making lots of different iterations of this same recipe. I think overall I do prefer the dry spices just because I have a tough time using up anything else. And the next recipe I'm going to share with you are these hot dogs that I made out of red lentils. I was trying to recreate those IKEA plant-based dogs that I loved so much. And I did have some failures along the way just getting to this point. However, I recreated my own version and it turned out really well. For this recipe, I'll be using all of the red lentils that I got, and I washed these and cleaned these very well. The original IKEA veggie dog has kale, red lentils, quinoa, onions, and wheat protein. And for some reason, I just completely forgot about the rice when I was making this. I was planning to add that in. However, I do want to use most of my rice for other recipes, but I also wanted to mimic the color. So I used a small portion of the zucchini skin and the green onions, just trying to add the color to my veggie dog. And then I cut up the red onion and 2 cloves of garlic. And then I've got a small amount of leftover onion that I'm holding on to because I know I can make a good use of that for something else. And for the red lentils, I probably could have gotten away with just soaking these and then blending them, but I ended up boiling them until they were just tender. And then for the seasoning mix, I'm going to saute all of these onions low and slow. I just want to get them very sweet and caramelized. I added some salt along with the garlic, the green onions, and some of that chopped zucchini skin. And then I drain these to get these as dry as possible. And this mixture with the onions and garlic smells so amazing, and it tastes even better. I added a little smoked paprika and just a few sprinkles of cumin. I also added some turmeric and some black pepper. And my first try at making these was not a success because the consistency just wasn't right. However, I did learn how to roll a perfect plant-based hot dog. And you basically just need to use this parchment paper and a bench scraper. So you're going to grab the piece of paper underneath and pull on it at the same time you're pushing on the top paper. And then it just extends that hot dog out and makes it as thin as you want it to be. As thin or as thick, but it will definitely make it even. And I wanted mine to be just about the size of the hot dog. And then you have the hot dog. And then you can just go ahead and roll these up and freeze these. However, like I said, my first hot dogs were not a success. And I was just thinking for a couple of days, what am I going to do with this mixture? It tastes amazing, but it's not giving me the consistency that I wanted. And if I would have actually been thinking this through properly, I would have remembered everything I had to do to make my black bean burgers have more of a consistency of a burger. I had to dry those out actually and blend them, and there were lots of other ingredients in there. I even tried adding some rice to some of the mixture just to see how that would turn out, but that didn't work either. So the next thing I tried was adding some flour into the mixture. My plan was to just add that in and let it sit for a while so that the gluten could start working in there, and then maybe knead it a bit and then fry it up and see how that worked. And I knew that having a thinner patty would automatically make the texture better, but the flour also really helped here. So this actually turned out to be a really nice chickpea patty. I was thinking about maybe making quite a few little coins and then making a sandwich out of this, but I really did want to try that hot dog shape. And in case you missed it earlier, 1/3 cup is about the right amount for these. And for this one, I decided to make the hot dog a little bit thinner and a little bit longer. And then just to play it safe, I threw it in the freezer for about 15 minutes before I fried this up, just to make sure that it held its shape. And this was the reason that I made the pickled onions in the first place, is I knew I wanted to have those for this recipe, and also the pickles. So I ended up adding some mayo to this, and I'm using the mayo that I made in the last video. This is just going to give it a little bit more moisture. I know that's not a typical condiment for hot dogs, but this is by no means a typical hot dog. And I tasted these onions and they are so good. I just love these pickled red onions. They're really going to make this hot dog, especially since we need that extra crunch. And then these pickles, they turned out more like dill pickles. I prefer bread and butter pickles, but I just used the brine that I was using for the red onions. You could just add a little more sugar into that brine to add to the pickle jar, and then I would have had the bread and butter pickles. But I actually think that this will work out fine for the hot dogs. But I can tell you already that I'm not going to have enough of the red onions for 8 of these hot dogs, because I love those hot dogs. And the texture on this hot dog turned out nice and crispy. And so now let's give it a try. You know, I'm super happy about this hot dog because I didn't think this was going to work out, but it's actually delicious. It still has, once you bite into it, it's a little bit crispy on the outside, but then it does have a soft interior, but it actually works with the crispy onions and the pickles. They really do help to save this. And if I'm not comparing this to a regular hot dog, then I rate this a much higher rating. This was so good that the next night when I got home from work, I wanted to have this same thing again for dinner. But before I show you that, I wanted to show you that I also tried this with typical condiments like ketchup and mustard. And then I wanted to show you the consistency. As you can see, it's crispy on the outside and it's kind of soft on the inside, so it's more like you're eating a sandwich. And if you look at it as a sandwich, then you're going to approach this a little bit differently. Here is the one that I made in the air fryer, and it turned out well. Actually, I didn't think it was going to work, but it did work. I like this enough to start keeping these frozen in my freezer just to have for weeknight meals. And then I also keep the buns frozen in the freezer, so it just makes a super quick meal. My son even tried this and thought it was delicious. You could also make this into little patties and then add that to your wraps. These red onions are delicious in wraps as well. You could also make the patties and then just serve those for dinner along with a vegetable. Lots of different things you can do with this recipe. And for my last meal of the video, I am going to be making just a basic fried rice. And this one is super simple. I'm using 2 eggs, but I'm going to make 3 servings of this fried rice. And so I'll go ahead and break my eggs open into this little container and whip these up. And then these will be ready for when I fry my rice. Sometimes I start the process with the eggs, and sometimes I start it with the rice and then push the rice off to the side and then add the eggs in. But today I just felt like starting with the eggs. This is a good way to extend out eggs, which is exactly why I'm doing it. And I've made fried rice lots of different ways. But this time I'm not going to be using soy sauce or sesame oil. I'm just using salt and pepper. Just the basics. And we're still going to get a very delicious fried rice. And of course I'm using the basmati rice. So this will be a first time for me for using the basmati in a fried rice. And I didn't overcook my eggs. They are nice and fluffy. So they are going to be extra delicious in this recipe. And I don't know why, but I was making mistake after mistake in this video. And here is another one. I got these vegetables, and for some reason this one has corn in it, which is not at all what I wanted. I just wanted the peas and carrots, but I must have been in a hurry when I was shopping, and I grabbed this one. I actually do like the little green beans in there. That is perfect, but I should have picked out the corn because I don't typically like corn in my fried rice. But who knows, you might like that. I added a little garlic powder in here as well and some turmeric, and that's going to give it a beautiful golden color. When I make regular fried rice, sometimes I add in some either vegetable seasoning or chicken bouillon seasoning. And typically if I add in chicken bouillon seasoning, then I dilute that in a small amount of water, and then I kind of ladle it into this. And that turns out really delicious. But since we're going with very, very minimal and basic spices, I wanted to use the turmeric to give it a little bit of color. And here I'm adding some salt in here. But if you have sesame oil or soy sauce and you want to add that in, then by all means, go ahead and do that. This is also great to have for dinner to add additional proteins in, but we do have the egg here. But you may want to add, like some chunks of chicken or tofu or beef. But this is definitely a one-pot meal. It's super easy. It only takes a few minutes, and it's really a great use of leftover rice. And here I used frozen leftover rice because I wasn't able to use all of that rice at once, so I just popped it in the freezer, and this is delicious. And it just goes to show that you don't always need all of the fancy condiments to make a delicious meal. I'm going to go ahead and add some green onions because we had the green onions in our haul, and these are just going to add a little bit of freshness. I could have also used fresh garlic, which I think would have been really nice, but I didn't. And I still have over half the bag of mixed vegetables left over. So I got 3 servings out of this. And again, it's delicious. I am really falling in love with this basmati rice. I'm finding I like it in many different applications. So I do think I need to get another bag of that from Sam's Club. We're just really enjoying that. And even though I made a lot of mistakes in this video, I love everything that I've discovered. I have at least 3 recipes from this video that I'm going to be adding into my rotation, and some of the failures that I experienced were really just opportunities for me to rethink my recipe and come up with solutions to the problem. And I just really created something that was better, I think, than obviously it would have been had I not made that mistake. So I hope you'll remember that, friends, the next time you make a mistake in the kitchen. Mistakes are just opportunities for new creations. Okay, let's talk about what's left of my grocery haul. I also did make a soup, which I'm not going to show you until next week, but here's what I have left over after I made that soup. I've got pretty much all of these vegetables, and I have been babying all of these vegetables with water ever since I got them. I also have 1 egg left. I have some flour left, some rice, the green lentils, garlic, some tomato paste, some ginger. I have all of these remains left, and then I also have the cilantro and the tomatoes, which I forgot to show here. I still have at least a couple of exciting recipes that I want to try with these ingredients, so we're going to meet back here next week and finish this off. I do hope you enjoyed this week's video as much as I enjoyed making it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you know when I release next week's video. Thanks so much for watching, friends. I'll see you Sunday.
Morning has broken, my windows are open. Wanna feel the wind blow through my hair. Which way do I follow? What happens tomorrow? I turn to you and hope you can guide the way. Sometimes I give up, just wanna be on my own. Even in the darkest times, you give me hope. So